What we're going to examine today is not a theory, and it's not an attack on professionals. It's a market analysis. This presentation looks at a simple but powerful question. What happens when the cost of delivering a service collapses, but the pricing structure does not? Over the next few minutes, we'll walk through the data behind residential real estate commissions, how technology systematically removed friction from the transaction process, and why the traditional percentage-based model remained largely untouched despite those changes. The core thesis is straightforward. Real estate commissions became disconnected from their underlying cost basis. And when that happens in any market, transparency eventually forces correction. That correction is now beginning. This is Steve Koleno, and this is Confidential Remarks. This exposes the central contradiction in the market. Over roughly 40 years, the national average commission rate moved from about 6% to approximately 5.7%. On paper, that sounds like downward pricing pressure, but the actual dollar commission tells a completely different story. As home prices appreciated, the commission attached to the median transaction exploded from roughly $5,000 in the mid-1980s to well over $23,000 today. So while the percentage barely moved, the consumer's real dollar cost increased dramatically. And that matters because the service itself did not become 4 times harder to deliver. In fact, the opposite happened. Technology removed massive amounts of labor, time, coordination friction, and information asymmetry from the process. The result is a pricing model that escalated automatically with asset appreciation, regardless of whether the underlying workload justified it. This is the automatic escalator effect. When compensation is tied directly to asset price instead of actual labor inputs, fees rise automatically as the asset appreciates. That means an agent can perform substantially similar work on 2 different homes while receiving dramatically different compensation, simply because one property is more expensive than the other. The important point here is not whether expertise has value. It absolutely does. The question is whether that value scales linearly with home price. Does a $400,000 home require 4 times the labor of a $100,000 home? Usually no. Yet the pricing structure behaves as though it does. This is why the commission model became increasingly detached from operational reality. It evolved into a percentage escalator connected to appreciation rather than cost. Most industries faced this exact disruption decades ago. Travel agencies lost their information advantage when consumers gained direct online booking access. Stock brokerage fees collapsed once digital trading platforms removed execution friction. Classified advertising was dismantled by internet marketplaces almost overnight. In each case, technology reduced delivery costs, increased transparency, and compressed margins. Real estate stands out because the opposite occurred. The cost to deliver the service fell substantially, but consumer pricing in real dollars increased. That makes residential real estate one of the clearest pricing outliers in the modern economy. It's important to recognize that the traditional commission structure originally solved a real problem. In 1995, agents controlled access to information. Listings were difficult to obtain. Marketing was manual. Signatures required physical coordination. Showings consumed enormous amounts of time and travel. The agent was not just a salesperson. They were the infrastructure layer of the transaction itself. That created genuine economic value. So this presentation is not arguing that commissions were always irrational. In many ways, they reflected the realities of the market at the time. The issue is that the market changed dramatically while the pricing architecture remained largely intact. Over the last 3 decades, nearly every friction point in the transaction process was reduced or automated. The internet eliminated the information monopoly. Electronic signatures removed physical paperwork logistics. Smartphones, digital photography, drones, and automated valuations reduced manual effort across marketing and pricing analysis. CRM's automated coordination. Lockboxes and self-service systems reduced showing friction. And AI is now accelerating automation even further. What matters is not whether agents still work hard. Many absolutely do. What matters is whether the market pricing structure evolved proportionally with the collapse in operational cost. The evidence suggests it did not. This breaks the transformation down function by function. Every major component of the transaction process became cheaper, faster, more scalable, or fully automated. Listings became universally accessible. Marketing became digital and nearly free. Photography became democratized. Comparative pricing analysis became automated. Paperwork moved online. Coordination became software driven. In most industries, this kind of efficiency gain leads to downward pricing pressure. But here, the savings created by technology were rarely passed through to consumers in proportional form. That is the heart of the decoupling argument. In 1995, only a tiny fraction of buyers found homes online. Today, essentially every buyer begins digitally. Consumers now have instant access to listings, pricing history, photos, school information, neighborhood data, and market comparisons. Technology solved the information problem almost completely, and yet commission structures still largely reflect an era built around information scarcity. That's the structural irony. The monopoly disappeared, but the pricing assumptions tied to that monopoly remain surprisingly durable. There are several common defenses of the traditional percentage model. One argument is that rates technically drifted lower over time, but a tiny decline in percentage terms does not offset massive increases in real dollar commissions. Another argument is that expertise, negotiation, and liability justify the pricing structure. And to be clear, expertise absolutely has value. But valuable expertise does not automatically require percentage-based compensation. In many professional industries, expertise is billed through flat fees, retainers, or structured service models. The final defense is that higher-priced homes carry greater risk. That may be partially true, but liability does not scale perfectly with home value in a mathematically linear way. The percentage model often overcompensates at the high end while undercompensating at the low end. That creates distortion rather than precision. The expectation was that litigation and settlement reforms would increase competitive pressure and reduce buyer-side commissions. Instead, the market largely adapted around the rules. Why? Because disclosure alone is not true transparency. Consumers still struggle to compare pricing models across providers in a meaningful, standardized way. And when markets lack clear comparative frameworks, historical norms tend to persist. That's why the structural outcome fell short of expectations. The legal framework changed, but the consumer shopping experience did not fundamentally change with it. This slide gets to the real barrier in the market: pricing opacity. Most consumers cannot easily compare service structures side by side. Without a visible marketplace of alternatives, historical norms become the default anchor. And once those anchors become socially reinforced, the market naturally stabilizes around them. That is why disclosure alone is insufficient. Transparency is not simply revealing a number. True transparency means consumers can evaluate competing models clearly, instantly, and confidently. The future market is likely not a single replacement model. It will probably be a spectrum of pricing structures. Some consumers may still prefer traditional percentage arrangements. Others may prefer tiered structures where percentages decline at higher price brackets. And many will likely choose flat fee or menu-based pricing models tied directly to services rendered. The key point is optionality. Transparency does not eliminate expertise. It allows expertise to compete more efficiently and more visibly. That is what mature markets eventually do. The final point is simple. The technology already exists. The operational cost reductions already happened. The legal pressure already exposed the issue. What remains is the market transition itself. And historically, markets tend to move toward efficiency once transparency becomes unavoidable. That does not mean agents disappear. Far from it. It means compensation models become more visible, more competitive, and more directly tied to differentiated value. The data increasingly points toward that outcome. And when consumers gain the ability to compare pricing structures, as easily as they compare anything else online, the correction mechanism becomes extremely difficult to stop. Thank you for your time. This has been Confidential Remarks.